Villavericino, living the Star Wars life.
Hey, this is Matt here, and I'm about to run through my Star Wars lightsaber Photoshop tutorial for you all. A little bit of Photoshop work to add lightsaber effects into toy or costuming photographs is a fun and effective way to finish off an image that features a Jedi or Sith character wielding the iconic Star Wars energy weapon. Over time, the representation of lightsabers in official media has changed subtly, as original movies have been remastered and publicity images have had additional tweaking prior to release, but I've fine-tuned a bit of a personal approach to achieve the lightsaber effect that I feel captures the original feel of the coloured glow. There are many ways to produce a lightsaber blade in a graphics app, of course, but a little work is required for it to not look too harsh or oversaturated, for instance. Here's my version of a step-by-step lightsaber Photoshop tutorial showing how to bring a lightsaber to life that others may find helpful. The following how-to is a guide only. A bit of artistry is required to take into account the scale of the image and other aspects like the overall image contrast and intended colour of the blade. We'll touch on that as we go through the steps. Step number 1. Select and open an image. Generally use the highest resolution you have available. 1080 pixels high or greater works well. An image where the saber blade is square on to the camera is the easiest, but this technique will work when the saber blade is angled towards the camera as well. In fact, that added perspective can actually make the overall effect even more realistic. The image that we're going to work with, shown here and here opened in Photoshop, is of our daughter Juliet in her Jedi costume taken at the Tongariro National Park in New Zealand. Step number 2. Create the blade core layer. Create a new layer using Shift-Control-N or from the menus Layer, New Layer. The layer should be set to Screen 100% opacity and select the Fill with Screen Neutral Color Black during this layer creation step. For convenience, give this layer a name such as Blade Core. We'll be using the Screen Blend mode for both the Blade Core and glow effects. Without getting into the maths of this blend mode, it's worth noting that black pixels in the screen layer do not affect the overall blend, color or brightness, while white or light pixels will result in a lighter color. Adobe describes this as being similar to projecting multiple photographic slides on top of each other. The bottom line is that it achieves the lightsaber glow effect we are after. Step number 3. Create the blade core. To create the blade core, which will be white in the final image, we need to draw a white blade onto the blade core layer, using whatever technique you prefer and or are most familiar with. One way or another, you need a blade that matches and covers the unlit blade in your raw photo. My personal preference is to create a selection using a lasso tool or pen tool to create a path, stepping around the visible edges of the unlit blade and filling it with pure white. You can alternatively achieve this just using a brush with a bit of fine-tuning and practice, if that is what you are most familiar with. Either way, it's important to match the shape and curve of both the tip of the saber blade and the point where it meets the emitter of the lightsaber hilt. When the saber is square onto the camera, the emitter end of the blade will just be a straight line at right angles to the edges of the blade, but if the blade is pointing towards the camera, a hint of curve will be seen. An optional step: if you're using a photo that does not have an unlit lightsaber blade in it, you can still apply this technique, but you'll need to manually insert a white blade onto this layer using the same approach as in the preceding step I just described. This is a little harder to do. A key thing is to fully ensure that the blade lines up well with the length of the saber hilt, as any unintentional angle between the hilt and blade throws the finished effect off. One way to do this that I sometimes resort to is to insert a temporary guide layer where I just use the pen tool to mock up a blade and then create a selection over it on the blade core layer as described in the previous step. Make sure you deselect the blade core if you've used a selection to create it once the selection is filled with white before proceeding. Step number 4. Create the blade glow layer. The glow of the blade will be created and manipulated separately from the blade core. To get to the starting point for the blade glow effect, simply duplicate the blade core layer and rename the resulting layer blade glow. This blade glow layer will therefore obviously also be set to screen blend mode and be filled with black, other than the duplicated saber blade core that's been drawn onto it. Step number 5, blur the blade core. At this point, both the blade core and blade glow layers are identical. Click back onto the blade core layer and apply a small amount of Gaussian blur. From the menu, select Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Apply it with a radius of about 3 pixels. This blur is part of the overall effect, but it also compensates for any inaccuracies in the drawing of the core, softening the curves of the saber tip, etc. A slightly higher blur radius may be used if you are manipulating a very high resolution image. Step number 6, blur and duplicate the blade glow layers. Now we're going to go back to the outer glow of the blade. The step's a little bit flexible and involves duplication and blurring of the original blade glow layer. First, blur the blade glow layer. Use Gaussian blur, again from the menu select Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, with a radius of about 8 pixels. Then duplicate this layer to create a second blade glow layer. Just leave its name as blade glow copy, it won't be sticking around for too long. Apply a Gaussian blur filter to the second blade glow layer with a larger radius this time, e.g. around 16 pixels. Duplicate the blade glow copy layer to create blade glow copy 2 and apply a Gaussian blur filter to this third glow layer with an even larger radius, this time around 24 pixels. This gives us 3 blade glow layers, each with a greater amount of blur applied. The overall effect is a lightsaber blade glow with a nice drop off in its transparency. If, because the image size or amount of contrast between the foreground and background of the image, you feel like you need more glow, this can be added by including additional duplication and blur steps, with incremental increases in the blur radius as you go. Step number 7, merge the blade glow layers. We want to add color to the blade glow layers as a single layer, so merge all 3 or more of these blade glow layers. With the top blade glow copy 2 layer selected, just use the Ctrl E shortcut or from the menu Layer, Merge Layers to merge blade glow copy 2 with the layer below it, and then once more to merge into the original blade glow layer. Do not accidentally merge the blade glow and blade core layers. Step number 8, add color to the blade glow. In a Star Wars lightsaber, the core generally remains white, while the color of the glow is subtly applied around it. The way we're going to achieve this is just by changing the color balance of the blade glow layer. The common primary colors of lightsabers, green, blue and red, are the easiest, but other color choices and variants do work well, with a few exceptions. Purple I've found to always be particularly hard. Select color balance using Ctrl B or from the menu Image, Adjustments, Color Balance. Move the RGB sliders for both the midtones and the highlights, leaving the Preserve Luminosity checked. For red, green and blue sabers, this pretty much means moving the sliders to 100% or near for the chosen color in both midtones and highlights. For example, for the green saber shown here, I've gone to plus 100% green in the midtones and plus 57% green in the highlights. Depending on personal preference, you can actually apply other adjustments to this blade glow layer at this point, including hue saturation, in addition to the color balance, in order to get the desired color and intensity. Just don't overcook the effect, as subtlety tends to work better. An optional step is to tweak the blade glow opacity. At this point, you're pretty much finished and can actually save the image for publication or sharing. However, because the blade glow layer is separate from the blade core layer, you may choose to first soften the blade glow by lowering the opacity of this layer over in the layers panel. Although optional, this fine-tuning is the most common one you may need to apply. Similarly, you can optionally strengthen the blade glow with adjustments as mentioned above, or by duplicating the blade glow layer, plus or minus further blurring as in the previous steps. One completely additional optional step is to add an emitter glow. Because the light from a lightsaber blade would likely fall on the person holding it and or on other surroundings, there is an additional step I sometimes incorporate to simulate this and to help tie the artificial lighting of the blade into the original image. I do this by adding in an additional layer that will render some light spill onto the hand, arm and body of the person holding the lightsaber. It should fall most strongly on the hand, as that is almost always the part of the body closest to the saber blade. Create a new layer with Shift Control N or Layer New Layer and call it Emitter Glow. As with previous steps, set the mode to screen, select Fill with Screen Neutral Color Black, and then we're going to render a lens flare roughly at the emitter base of the saber where the blade meets the hilt. From the menu, choose Filter, Render Lens Flare. Choose a lens flare that focuses more on adding a glowing point rather than the dispersed and colourful flare effects. Go with something like the 105mm prime with the brightness dropped back to about 50 or 60%. Once rendered on this layer, you can use the Move tool to drag that layer until the center of the flare is better positioned over the emitter of the lightsaber, unless you got it perfectly right during the render step. Although you don't generally need to, you may choose to fill the transparent space using the paint bucket tool on the Emitter Glow layer that resulted from it being moved with black. This will ensure that any rendered lighting effects that fall on the screen rather than right at the saber emitter won't have a harsh edge caused when the layer was moved. So that it's not too strong, the opacity of the Emitter Glow layer can be altered to taste at this point. Although we're pretty much done at this point, feel free to play around with other adjustments to any of the layers that you've added in. You can duplicate any layer to strengthen it, increase the blur, drop the layer opacities, and or further adjust the color balance of the blade glow to create more than one version of a finalized image. Have fun and feel free to comment with links to any lightsaber effect pictures you've created.
If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like, check out our other videos, and subscribe for alerts about new uploads. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.